Good morning, fellow pilgrims, friends and neighbors. Thank you for joining us this morning for our daily devotional at Pilgrim Congregational Church. I'm Patrick Horn. I'm glad that you're here. We are working this week still in the book of Acts, and this time we are looking at Acts chapter 17. And now we've switched characters again. A couple weeks ago, we were looking closely at Peter's sermon. Last week, we looked at Stephen's speech and the story of his being stoned. And this week, we're going to look at Paul's speech to the Athenians, that is, to those living in Athens, Greece. This is a fascinating story for lots of reasons. The Athenians were well known for being seekers and curious folks, and I need to give you the background for this particular passage, and we're going to look at the first two verses of this passage that runs from Acts chapter 17, verses 22 to 31. Acts 17, verses 22 to 31. So today I'm going to read this entire passage, and then I'm going to give us a little bit more of a background and then focus for a few moments on the first two verses. So this is Acts chapter 17, verses 22 through 31. So Paul, standing in the middle of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription: to an unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all men life and breath and everything. And he made from one every nation of men to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their habitation, that they should seek God in the hope that they might feel after him and find him. Yet he is not far from each one of us. In him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your poets have said. For we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, a representation by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all men by raising him from the dead." So this is the extraordinary passage in which Paul appeals to the shrine to an unknown God. Now, I mentioned that the Athenians were a very curious folk, and they were very religious and very scholarly. The Areopagus appears to have been something like a council, but perhaps more like a scholarly council than a legal council, probably some of both, because the Athenians took their religious beliefs very seriously. And Paul has been charged with being a babbler, that is, someone talking about things that he doesn't know anything about. And so he has been charged with something, and he does appear to be giving a defense of himself. And we do know enough about ancient Athens to know that they had very specific requirements about whether or not someone could teach in Athens about a particular god. And so Paul is actually responding to those particular requirements. And there were three basic requirements for a deity to be included in the pantheon of deities in Athens. The first was, there were three requirements. The first is that the one speaking on behalf of the deity had to know what they were talking about. So they had to demonstrate that they were knowledgeable. And Paul tries to do this. And second, they had to demonstrate that the deity wanted to live in Athens, that the deity desired to reside in the city of Athens. And then three, the spokesperson for the deity had to demonstrate that the deity would be wanted the best for Athenians and had goodwill toward the Athenians. And so Paul is essentially trying to respond to these requirements. And so in these first two verses, he really sets the stage for explaining why he has the authority to speak. He demonstrates his knowledge, and so he first, of course, praises the Athenians for their being very religious, and then he demonstrates that he has researched, as it were, the gods of Athens. He's gone around the entire city looking at the various gods, and he finds one altar with the inscription, "To an unknown God." And he says to the Athenians that this is the one that you worship. But he's going to explain to them, in responding to the second requirement about residence in Athens, that this God doesn't require residence in Athens, because this God is not something that you could represent with gold or precious metals or stone, that this God is the source of everything. And so he is going to argue that this God doesn't need a residence in Athens, and that this God offers salvation to everyone in Jesus Christ. Well, we're going to spend a lot of time in these verses this week. I think what I would have us take away initially is Paul's efforts with the Athenians. He's clearly getting to the message of the gospel, but notice that he works very hard to understand and figure out where the Athenians are in their own lives, and he works very hard to understand them and to try to be able to address their concerns and their needs. And I think this is a very important lesson for us, that in our Christian walk, there's often a temptation to feel that we have things figured out if people would just listen. Paul makes it clear that that's not to be our relationship with others. That in this passage we learn that Paul is actually very sensitive to the Athenians and their desire to be religious, and he tries to begin by explaining the gospel in terms that they would understand. And so I think this is a very, very good lesson for us. I'm going to close from the book of prayer that I like so much, this one by W.E. Orchard. Immortal, eternal, invisible, who hidest thyself in darkness and silence, who veilest thy glory in the lesser beauty of nature. Thy form is unknown. Thy name we mortals dare not utter, yet thy worship is truth, and thy tabernacle is the person. Calm our passions, silence our clamorous thoughts, that we may be still and know that thou art God. Put out all lesser lights, that we may see the light within. Naked in soul we stand before thy dread tribunal, that trembling there we may know no other fear, that gazing upon the face of the eternal, we may not fear the face of people. Lead us through the deeps of our own nature, past the gateways of thought, till face to face, heart to heart, thought to thought, we are in thy presence. Break down pride, burn out sin, banish self. May perfect love cast out all fear, perfect sacrifice make an end of sin, and thou, the all in all, smite down the prison house of self, and set our spirits free, in tune with the infinite, at home with the eternal. Shut us in with thyself, O God. Amen. Thank you for joining us for this daily devotional. I'm Patrick Horn with Pilgrim Congregational Church. I hope you have a great day. Goodbye.